You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. US President Donald Trump signaled he could meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House in the coming weeks to finalize the deal on critical minerals. The UN General Assembly, meanwhile, approved a Ukrainian resolution demanding an immediate withdrawal of all Russian troops from Ukraine on the third anniversary of the invasion. 3 years on from Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the UK imposed over 100 new sanctions directly targeting those who continue to aid the invasion. The European Union too hit Russia with a new round of sanctions. Days after his meeting with Bangladesh's Foreign Affairs Advisor, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has cautioned Bangladesh over its inconsistent outlook towards India. Canada's latest steps to curb migration is likely to have an adverse effect on tens of thousands of foreign students, including those from India. It will also negatively impact those who apply for work and resident permits. India and the United Kingdom have restarted a negotiation for a trade pact. UK's Trade Secretary says the trade pact is of top priority for the government of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Vivek Ramaswamy has said that he is running for Ohio governor just over a month after he stepped down as co-leader of a government efficiency effort in the Trump White House. Well, our big focus, Donald Trump says that he will meet Ukraine's Zelensky as soon as this week to sign a critical minerals deal. He added that they will meet at the Oval Office and an agreement's being worked on now, further affirming that they are very close to a final deal. But Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister has said that the deal is also in the final stages. Meanwhile, Zelensky seems not very keen. Basically, the deal involves the US gaining preferential access to hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Ukraine's critical minerals, which the Trump administration is demanding as payback for already provided aid, while offering no clear security guarantees or prospects of future aid for Kyiv in return. As you know, under Trump's leadership, the White House has vowed to end the Russia-Ukraine war as soon as possible, while shifting America's stance to echo Russia's narrative about Kyiv provoking Moscow into starting this entire war. The US is also looking to stop funding Ukraine's war effort. Just listen in to the US President's remarks.
I will be meeting with President Zelensky. In fact, he may come in this week or next week to sign the agreement, and which would be nice. I'd love to meet him. Would meet at the Oval Office. So the agreement's being worked on now. They're very close to a final deal. It'll be a deal with rare earths and various other things, and he would like to come, as I understand it, here to sign it, and that would be great with me. I think they then have to get it approved by their council or whoever might approve it, but I'm sure that will happen.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron displayed stark differences, and analysts actually point out, in their approach to Ukraine, exposing a divide between the United States and Europe over Trump's bid for a quick ceasefire deal with Russia. In fact, during a day of talks between the two leaders, Trump and Macron showed a friendly rapport between each other based on years of good ties, but Macron made it clear that he disagreed with Trump on some key issues as they marked 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. You see, Macron is the first European leader to visit Trump since he began his second term, and contrary to Trump's newly adopted stance, Macron says Russia is the aggressor in Ukraine.
I support the idea to have Ukraine first being compensated, because they are the ones to have lose a lot of their fellow citizens and being destroyed by these attacks. Second, all of those who paid for could be compensated, but not by Ukraine, by Russia, because they were the one to aggress.
Again, just so you understand, Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid. We paid 60% of the total efforts, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear. We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan, because this is not our belonging. So they are.
By the way, Trump refused to call Vladimir Putin a dictator on the third anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, despite having previously described Zelensky with the same term. Now, while in the Oval Office with Emmanuel Macron at the White House to discuss the war, the US president said he did not use those words lightly, and we'll see how it all works out. Listen in.
President called Zelensky a dictator. Would you use the same words regarding Putin?
I don't use those words lightly. I think that we're going to see how it all works out. Let's see what happens. I think we have a chance of a really good settlement between various countries. And, you know, you're talking about Europe, and you're talking about Ukraine as part of that whole situation. The other side has a lot of support also.
In the other crucial development, the United Nations General Assembly has backed a resolution drafted by Ukraine and the European Union condemning Russia on the third anniversary of its full-scale invasion, spurning a rival US resolution reflecting Donald Trump's split with Europe and growing union with Putin. In fact, the United States, Russia, Belarus and North Korea voted against the resolution, as 93 countries voted in favor. In a win for Ukraine on the third anniversary of Russia's invasion, the United States failed to get the UN General Assembly to approve its resolution, urging an end to the war without mentioning Moscow's aggression. And the Assembly approved a dueling European-backed Ukrainian resolution demanding Russia immediately withdraw from Ukraine. So as I mentioned, 93 voted in favor. India and China abstained from voting. US and Russia voted against the resolution. Jessica Stone joins us live from Washington with a roundup of all that's been happening. Jessica, we're seeing an extraordinary shift in US policy since Donald Trump's election. Sharp divides on display between Europe and the US when it comes to resolving the war. Take us through all the latest developments.
Yeah, a lot of division on display, both in Washington at the White House and at the United Nations up there in New York City. Let's begin with the division in the White House. You outlined a lot of the differences between Macron and U.S. President Donald Trump when it comes to Ukraine. During the Oval Office, you saw Macron correct Trump's assertion that the U.S. was giving grants while the Europeans were giving loans. Then during the press conference, which you see there, Macron warned that reaching peace must not mean surrendering Ukraine, a stark warning there, and again emphasizing that he would call Russia the aggressor here. He also added that Europe must provide more security guarantees to Ukraine, which is certainly something that the White House is looking for. Then dueling drafts at the same time at the United Nations in New York City, many dueling drafts, not just the one in front of the General Assembly, but one in front of the UN Security Council later in the day, basically outlining two different approaches to this war and to what it is and what it is not. And the Europeans, again, emphasizing that Russia is the aggressor, the US not signing on to that version of events, instead opting for a clean version of just calling for an end to the war. And when pressed to justify that, particularly in light of the second vote at the UN Security Council, the United States said, we just want a clean version. We want to make sure that the war ends, and we want to start with something clean and narrow in terms of doing that. So definitely a different chapter in U.S. positioning when it comes to Ukraine. We'll see if this strategy works as we move through the talks.
Jessica, as always, thank you so much for joining us with the lowdown. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom has imposed over 100 new sanctions directly targeting those who continue to aid the invasion. The European Union, too, hit Russia with a new set of sanctions. In fact, the EU has adopted the 16th sanctions package against Russia to further ramp up pressure on the aggressor, as they call Russia, and have further targeted sectors of the Russian economy, such as energy, trade, transport, infrastructure, as well as financial services. And China's President Xi Jinping affirmed his no-limits partnership in a phone call with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. China's state media is reporting this, further adding that the leaders held the talks as Donald Trump has pushed for a quick deal to end the Ukraine war, raising the prospect that Washington could draw a wedge between Xi and Putin to focus on competing with the world's second-largest economy. Let's switch tracks now. Well, days after his meeting with Bangladesh's Foreign Affairs Advisor Tauheed Hossain in Muscat, Our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has cautioned Bangladesh over its inconsistent outlook towards India, advising Dhaka to refrain from some of the ridiculous claims being made against India by leaders of the interim government. Dr. Jaishankar's caution comes amid Dhaka's increasingly hostile behavior towards New Delhi, and voicing his concern sternly, the foreign minister said Bangladesh must make up their mind right now on which direction they want their relationship with India to head. And further highlighting Dhaka's duplicity, our External Affairs Minister has said Bangladesh cannot say it wants good ties with India while blaming New Delhi at the same time for everything that goes wrong for them domestically. With that, let's turn our attention now to Canada. Well, latest steps to curb migration there are likely to have an adverse effect on tens of thousands of foreign students, including those from India. It will also negatively impact those who apply for work and resident permits. Canada has introduced big changes to its immigration regulations. In fact, the new Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations, which came into effect on the 31st of January, authorized border officials to cancel temporary resident documents, such as electronic travel authorizations and temporary resident visas. So these changes will impact students, employees, and temporary resident visitors, many of whom are from India. And the amended rules would result in the cancellation of approximately 7,000 additional temporary resident visas, work permits, and study permits, according to reports. But you must note that this is no surprise because these changes are according to the rules that are in line with Canada's strategy to tighten immigration rules. And with that, let's turn our attention to the India-UK Free Trade Agreement negotiations. Well, India and the United Kingdom announced the resumption of negotiations, of the free trade agreement that had stalled for over 8 months following the elections in both countries. The ministers, however, declined to give a timeline as to when the negotiations would be completed and the FTA would be signed. But listen in to the reactions we have lined up for you.
Both Jonathan and I have agreed to resume free trade agreement negotiations in a very, very cordial atmosphere and with great trust between the two governments, which was reflected in the meeting this morning. We will be able to make rapid progress to meet the collective aspirations for trade, investment, and the mutual prosperity of the people of United Kingdom and India. Friends, we have decided to build upon the strong groundwork that 14 previous rounds had developed, a win-win for both our countries.
India is a vital partner for the UK. We are lucky to already have such a strong relationship with India, of course, underpinned by the living bridge between our countries, the 1.7 million people with Indian heritage who call the UK their home. Of course, what binds us together even further is our shared ambition through championing free and open trade and investment to drive jobs and growth across both of our countries.
And a quick update from the United States. Donald Trump backed Elon Musk's demand that federal employees explain their recent accomplishments by the end of Monday or risk getting fired. Well, a lawsuit has been filed against this entire situation. Attorneys for the workers have said in a lawsuit that Musk violated the law with his weekend demand that federal employees explain their accomplishments or risk being fired. The suit has been filed by unions and advocacy groups. It alleges that the email violates laws regarding federal workforce and that the Office of Personnel Management, which sent the email, does not actually have the authority to make this demand. Jake Novak is with us, waiting patiently, live from New York at the moment. Jake, federal worker unions have sued Elon Musk over this demand that they justify their jobs. How do you see this playing out?
Well, what a ridiculous demand from these unions to say that just asking what they did, you used the word accomplishments. It doesn't have to necessarily be accomplishments. They were asked to describe what work they did over the past weekend. Those of us who work in the private sector are used to these kinds of demands all the time. The federal workers that you mentioned earlier, they have a union. And when the federal workforce in America was drastically expanded under President Franklin Roosevelt, they wanted to unionize. And President Roosevelt very wisely didn't allow that. because he knew that those workers would use that union power not to really be accountable to the public. But under President John F. Kennedy, they finally got enough influence over the president, and they did get him to allow these unions. And here's what we're seeing now. You know, we don't just have a larger federal workforce than we did 50 or 60 years ago. We have twice the size of our federal workforce from just 15 years ago. This has to stop. This has to be made accountable. It's not like in the United States. We don't have an aristocracy or a caste system here in the United States. But the political class wants to be treated as if they're aristocracy, and that has to stop. So they'll fight this. But I think at the end of the day, the president's authority to fire and hire and to scrutinize federal workers will be upheld. It may take until we get to the Supreme Court, but I think it will be upheld.
Well, let's wait and see if the unions have a strong legal case. But Jake, thanks so much as always for making time for us on NDTV.
Sure.
Well, news and updates continue in a moment right here on NDTV. We're slipping into a very short break for now. And to a tragic collapse that has been caught on camera. 3 workers were killed and 5 others were injured in South Korea's highway construction site collapse. A bridge collapsed, as you can see on your screens, at an expressway construction site. The National Fire Agency said it has issued an order mobilizing firefighters to search for people missing in this accident being reported from South Korea. Let's turn our attention to Canada now. More than 2 lakh people from Canada have signed a parliamentary petition calling for their country to strip Elon Musk's Canadian citizenship because of the tech billionaire's alliance with Donald Trump, who has spent his second US presidency repeatedly threatening to conquer its independent neighbor to the north and turn it into its 51st state. Well, meanwhile, in this exclusive snippet, Gauri Dwivedi speaks to Google DeepMind's Pushmeet Kohli on the future of India's AI journey. Listen in.
You mentioned about the models. One is that, where does Google find that balance between open source and proprietary? You've got to make money. You're a large corporation. You're accountable to your shareholders. But at the same time, you're talking about scientific innovation that impacts humanity.
Yeah, so I think these discussions, these decisions are taken with a lot of thought. In the context of models like AlphaFold, the decision was taken that this technology, if we share it with the world, that will be the thing that maximizes the impact of that technology. So AlphaFold 2 has been completely sort of open sourced in terms of its weights. The AlphaFold database has been used by 190 countries and scientists, 2.7 million scientists across the world. So it just shows you the accessibility and the democratization power of this sort of technology. In some other sort of models, where you have to sort of continuously make improvement, it doesn't make sense, or it's not very easy to open source every other day as these sort of technologies sort of improve. So we sort of rely on a more closed source mechanism also to sort of protect both commercial as well as safety considerations.
As always, we'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.